So here we are, 1 week and a couple of days removed from the Super Bowl 2023, and we're already ready to talk 2024 football. What is this? We just can't get enough football. And it's exciting right now for me as we go into a lot of different topics because Dan, you and I have texted, we have direct emails. We've done a lot of things in the last couple of years, but we've never been on the same screen together. So this is pretty exciting because even though we're not going to make this a special team show, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. How are you doing today?
I'm happy you brought up special teams. Super Bowl, man. That's the Ron A Sports tweet I'm talking about. For anybody who doesn't know, when I tweet you, special teams, man, that's what costed the Niners. I had a lot of other issues, but special teams is what costed them ultimately to me.
Yeah, it's really amazing how 1/3 of the game kind of gets ignored, especially with all the new rules where you can basically fair catch, kick out of the end zone, do all these different things. And yet we saw a couple of things in the Super Bowl that reminded us that if you don't pay attention to special teams, you don't win the game. And we're not going to rehash the Super Bowl, but there's probably 12 different things that happened to San Francisco, and any one of which could have won them the game and what turned out to be a fascinating end of the season game, and maybe made me more pumped to talk about what's coming up for 2024. We can't wait to get it started, even though the downtime from my end is really appreciated.
I'm excited for some downtime. I'm gonna be honest with you, dude. I keep forgetting the Super Bowl was only about a week ago. It's college basketball season for me. The NFL feels long to me anymore. Though the 18th week, you had the playoffs, you had the 2 weeks off. It just feels like it goes on and on. And we're what, 2 weeks? 2 weeks away from the combine already. There's draft props already out. I'm like, man, this just goes on, and you really don't get that typical break you used to get where you'd have some time off. It's off season, and they're already going.
I agree completely. The Super Bowl used to end at the end of January. My wife and I would be in some other country in February and still make it back in plenty of time to look at the combine and to get ready for all the other stuff. Let's start at the top. Let's just, do a postmortem on Kansas City and San Francisco. They got here, and even though it seems like Kansas City's here every year, it's hard, Miami under Dan Marino, they thought they were going to come back to the Super Bowl. They never came back to the Super Bowl. There's a lot of teams that have never tasted the Super Bowl. It's tough to repeat. Now that we've had a week to digest Kansas City and San Francisco, what are the next steps for these teams in your eyes?
The short answer is, what are you going to do to get better or at least get back to this game? Particularly the 49ers. This is the year where they gave up all those draft picks the last few years. They haven't had a premium draft pick in what, 3-4 years now? I've lost track because they just keep giving them away. They just, at some point, it's going to come back to haunt you. And this was the last season to me where you take this core group of guys. They've had some poor draft classes. Like if you look at the 2022 class, man, outside of Purdy, bust on top of bust on guys you've never heard of. That's fine short term, but 2, 3, 4 years later, it comes back to haunt you. Niners need offensive line help. Niners need secondary help. Drake Greenlaw, unfortunate Achilles tear, and that just hurt to watch. They have drafted kind of, but it's always hard to grade these guys who are going third, fourth, fifth round. And at that point, it's just kind of a lottery ticket. They did take Moody, who I was impressed with in the Super Bowl because everyone was talking about his issues. And I thought that would come back to haunt them, but it wasn't actually his fault that his PAT got blocked. McCaffrey, they gave up 5 or 6 total picks in my notes, and it was high picks. So he's panned out well. On the flip side, the Niners, you had the Tyreek Hill trade. I had to go look all this back up. They gave out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks. A lot of picks going around. But with the Niners, CMC was a success. Well, I think it was a success because he had questions about his injuries, questions about his usage, and he seems like he's panned out the last 2 years. And Niners are one Brock Purdy injury away from being at another Super Bowl possibly. So I feel like they've done a lot. I feel like they've done well without the picks. Kansas City gave up all those picks, and McDuffie, who I absolutely love coming out, has been a home run pick. That was also the Karlaftis pick. He's been okay, but again, it takes about 2-ish years anymore for a lot of these rookies to really contribute. So when you do get that guy, the McDuffies of the world, you're thankful for that. So Niners gave up a lot of picks and hit those guys with McCaffrey particularly and Purdy, which they did luck out with after the Lance debacle. Kansas City gave up a guy, a free agency wide receiver, and the thing we heard all season, they need a wide receiver, but they actually hit those picks. So long story of those two was you had two different team approaches doing well, succeeding to me if your success rate is being Super Bowl contenders. Now, if they didn't get to the Super Bowl, then you could argue that they did not succeed. But I think they went two different directions and did end up in the Super Bowl. And it was about a coin flip game with the coin flip result.
Yeah, I think that was well put. There are different approaches to team building, and some build through the draft, some quick fixes through free agency. The Rams, we know their style. They didn't even have a number one pick. There are different approaches, but regardless of what approach you take, first, you need a quarterback in today's NFL. And secondly, you need to hit on your free agents. Not everybody hits on free agents, and you need to hit on your draft choices. And you're right about San Francisco. They have some superstars on the team, but the core of the team has been built by pretty mediocre draft choices other than the front line, which the front line on defense, they built around a whole series of number one draft picks. So, a lot of teams build from the inside on out, and that's what San Francisco has done. Agree with all your assessments as to what they need to continue to be at the level that they want to be at. The Greenlaw injury is unfortunate for them because he's really not going to be ready at the beginning of the year. It's going to be a tough situation. So add linebacker to the list of what they need. The back seven relies on the front four and Bosa's pass rush to really buy them time. Jahir Brown, who was their first pick last year, started to come on at the end of the season, made a lot of tackles. He was picked 90 or something. So you're right, they didn't have some early draft choices. Kansas City, even starting with Mahomes, recognized the need for not just making the playoffs with the very reliable Alex Smith, but to go beyond what is needed. And they recognize the need for speed, not only offensively, but defensively. What they did with Nick Bolton, who flies around the field, and McDuffie and everybody else, is they've changed the equation on how they spread the field around, not only offensively, but the way they get in your face defensively. And they use a lot of blitzes from their cornerbacks and their safeties. And we saw that maybe be one of those 12 plays that really mattered with the blitz play that forced Purdy to throw a little bit sooner than he wanted to. Kansas City was one Week 18 reset away from, I think, not making the Super Bowl. And the fact that they locked into a playoff spot before Week 18 was a reminder to me that Kansas City wasn't an elite team this year, but the way the circumstances played out, they were able to rely on their coaching, their reset, and Pat Mahomes to get the job done. And I don't think they're going to sit on anything for next year. So it's going to be very interesting to see what these teams' approaches are going to be. I don't think they're going to alter their approaches, but I think they are still going to have to hit on everything because it's still tough to repeat. In San Francisco, they knocked on the door. This was the third time they knocked on the door, and this time they got in to play the Super Bowl.
I do want to ask you about these deep playoff runs. Niners don't have much depth. They're so top heavy. And with the Greenlaw injury, do we see a team like the Chiefs or the Niners kind of struggle next year? Because that's a lot of extra games, a lot of extra minutes. Both teams are so top heavy anymore. You saw with the Kansas City offensive line, they lost some guys. The defense stayed healthy, but both teams are so top heavy to me right now. They're going to really need to have a good draft or free agency period. Kelsey was, I think, injured, and they didn't really let it on. And I think that's why he struggled. I thought that Week 18 was a gift to the Kansas City Chiefs because Kelsey was going to play, and that was the rumor that week. He's going to play for incentives, and he didn't get pulled until, I want to say 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock the day of. It's some Lions. No, was it the Yes, it was the Lions to Sam Laporta, and Lions lost Laporta that first game. Oh, they didn't lose him. He was just really, really hurt. And I think that injury caused the Chiefs to be like, look, Kelsey, you're not playing, man. We don't need you this week. It's just incentive. Let it go. So both teams really need to draft well because they're getting top heavy. And both sides did kind of luck out that the NFC was so weak. And the AFC, my goodness, man, how many quarterbacks got hurt on that side alone?
Yeah, no. Yeah, 61 different quarterbacks started a game this past year. And boy, the NFL needs some fresh blooded quarterback, because I could name 15 quarterbacks who shouldn't even be in the NFL that started a game this year. So there's a great divide. Kansas City, yeah, I think they're going to go after a wide receiver too. They don't really have another option besides the promising rookie Rashee Rice. Obviously, they have Kelsey. They may even restock a little bit behind Pacheco at running back. They'll add an offensive lineman. They'll add some speed defensively. They have the Chris Jones issue. It's mainly a function of what are the other teams going to do to try to unseat Kansas City and San Francisco. We know what these two teams are about. I'm not necessarily worried about either team. What I'm worried about is other teams will catch up, and based on either easier schedules or the fact that their quarterback is maturing, or the fact that if San Francisco doesn't fix its back seven, that they're vulnerable to the Detroit Lions, who got their feet wet this past year, and they know that they can compete with anybody in the NFC. Green Bay has to feel that they got a really promising effort out of Jordan Love. Seattle is very young, built on back-to-back drafts. So for me, it's more about what these teams do to close the gap. And I think as we go through free agency and the draft, we're probably going to be able to identify one or two teams that have closed the gap on these teams. And what you said about the shortening of the season, with this being toward the back end of February already, there's not enough reset time for Kansas City and San Francisco, while these other teams have had a month to think about things and to plan. And that's a big difference. Let's talk quarterbacks, because everybody wants to hear about quarterbacks. And there's so many veteran quarterbacks and so many potential draft quarterbacks that can reshape a team in, right away. If you go the CJ Stroud, experiment, that was hardly an experiment. It was a huge success. Do you go that way? And then we have Kirk Cousins, and we have Jimmy Garoppolo, and we have Ryan Tannehill, and we have the dilemma that's Russell Wilson. What's your first thoughts on some of the quarterbacks that may change teams this year? These in particular, and any others you're thinking about?
Kirk Cousins, that was the guy I was so upset he got hurt. If you remember, I know it was like 3 or 4 months ago, it seems like. The Vikings started off poorly because some very fluky turnovers, and they were the most fluky of fluky. But Kirk Cousins was absolutely killing it. They started slow. They were about 5-5 when he got hurt. So that's the one guy, if Minnesota Vikings, we want to bring back if he's good to go. He's had plenty of time to recover to me. It is an Achilles tendon, so maybe it does take longer. He's an older guy. I think they have to bring him back. They were playing so well. You knew the defense was going to struggle a bit because Flores runs a unique system that takes some time to get used to. So I felt in the beginning, as long as Kirk Cousins was playing well, I think the Vikings were a very solid NFC team. I don't know if they're Super Bowl contenders, but I thought you can make an argument for them when Kirk Cousins was playing as well as he could. They were the second and the third best team. A lot of these other guys, Ryan Tannehill is going to be gone. If you need a backup, like the Pittsburgh Steelers do, and I believe they have Arthur Smith now, they're going to have some serious talks. You had the Fields dilemma. You have Russell Wilson, who I'm not surprised is going to be getting cut, because when they brought in Sean Payton, my guess is he brought in a guy, his backup quarterback, and it was going to be, if you don't want Wilson, we're going to move on from him. So I think he's gone. Daniel Jones contract, I believe it is front loaded, and this is the second season with it. So if they really do want to get out of it, and that's a discussion you and I can talk about, if they want out of that Daniel Jones contract, they can get out of it next year pretty easily. So I think a lot of these guys are going to have to ask themselves, are you a starter? Most of them are not to me anymore, but you do need a backup. You said 61, right? 61
Yeah.
QB. 60, that is so many, man. If you're the Vikings, I mean, you didn't have a confident backup last year, and they were trying to get in the playoffs still at that time. So these are guys I think you could have as a backup where you don't need them to play all the time. But if you need that 1 or 2 game stretch, I think a lot of these guys could still play well enough, or at least mediocre enough. So older guys, I just think you can't build around them anymore. It's proven you can't use them anymore, or the teams are so poorly built you can't use them. So
Yeah. I strayed from this before, but I'm back to it again. Your most important position is quarterback. Sometimes your second most important position is backup quarterback, even with the pass rushers, even with the cornerback rules and how hard it is. We've seen wide receivers that are electric and elite. But you saw, and you mentioned Tyreek Hill is no longer in Kansas City, and all they've done is win 2 Super Bowls without him. So that's not the position I'm looking for. Cousins is going to be pricey, and he may be looking for more than a 1-year guarantee now. It's really a dilemma in Minnesota whether they re-sign him. I don't think Jimmy G is a starter anymore. I think he has to go to a backup situation. I liken this to the Gardner Minshew argument. Gardner Minshew is really a spot starter. If you have to start him for a couple of games, you're going to be fine. But, there is a ceiling to Gardner Minshew. On the other hand, if your lead quarterback is somebody like Anthony Richardson, if your lead quarterback is Kyler Murray, if your lead quarterback is somebody who uses his legs a lot and not just his arm, you need a competent backup quarterback. And to me, Ryan Tannehill and Jimmy G, they need to find themselves teams behind a mobile quarterback. And these teams who have a mobile quarterback have to keep in mind that they're going to need somebody with experience behind them, so that they're going to miss the playoffs if they're going to go down with an Anthony Richardson, if they're going to go down with one of these mobile quarterbacks. It really matters. And I think Tannehill and Jimmy G for sure in the short run can give you 2 or 3 games before he gets injured. The issue I have of all these people is I don't know what to do with Russell Wilson. Is it the Raiders? Is it Washington? Is it Minnesota? Is it Atlanta? A lot of talk about Atlanta, but there are varying degrees of thought as to whether or not Atlanta is really a contender. In that division, everybody's a contender, but really what's the ceiling for Atlanta? 9-8 and bounced in the first round of the playoffs, or can they build an entire team? I just don't know what to do with Russell Wilson.
I think Wilson's done for. That's my opinion. I mean, when you bench him, how much talk have we had about Wilson? A lot. I think he's out the door. They have that weird NFL PA versus NFL contract situation where he has to take a pay cut. The team is allegedly, quotes, allegedly, forcing him to take a pay cut. He's saying he's not doing it. The team says he's going to do it. So I think he's gone. I think when they brought in Sean Payton, it's going to be, if you don't want Wilson, show him the door. We'll get him out. I think they brought in Payton for a reason.
Yeah, it's going to be costly, but that's what they're doing. It's always been said teams that draft somewhere between 13th and 20th are in purgatory, because they're going to miss out on what is usually a top 6, 7, 8 draft class year after year. So they miss out on that, and they can never better the one position that they need to get better at unless they hit on a quarterback that slides in the draft, or maybe you do get these guys every once in a while that hit that you didn't know were going to hit. Even Russell Wilson, when he was drafted 75th or wherever he was drafted, had a great run for a long, long time and was excellent in the position. And we know that Sean Payton gets trigger happy and he likes to move up in the draft and do some different things too. So it's going to be interesting what happens in Denver, because they're paying Sean Payton a lot of money and he cost them a draft pick. So there's a lot riding on what happens in Denver, even though coaching wise, they certainly improved at the end of the year. So we'll see what happens there. We have quarterbacks that might go 1, 2, 3 in this draft. We have Drake May. We have Caleb Williams. We have Jaden Daniels, who, some people put ahead of Drake May. Some people would like to move him back a little bit and so on. How do you think the top 3, does it shake out in your mind that we go 1, 2, 3 quarterbacks in the 2024 draft?
Top two, yes. You cannot go into next season if you're the Bears or the Commanders with your current quarterback situation. So, top two, as my computer freezes here a bit. Top two, yes. Top three, this is the first year I can actually discuss what the Patriots are going to do without Bill Belichick because they were just question mark, take a guess, don't take a guess. Your answer is good as bad as mine. It was just a guess. Do they really want to go to the veteran route? Do they like Jaden Daniels? Or maybe it is Drake May there at three. If it's Drake May there at three, then I think they're going to for sure take a quarterback. But Jaden Daniels, at least, you can make an argument he's not a top three pick. So it's going to be silly season. That's the best way to put it. You already heard the Bears are for sure locked into Fields. 3 days after week 18, that report came in. I immediately rolled my eyes. I've heard the Bears are going to trade the number one pick. I've heard the Patriots are not going to take a quarterback and take Marvin Harrison Jr. So, do I think it's going to be top three ultimately? Yes. Will I bet on it? No. It's going to come down to what do these guys do in the building? And this is the one thing I wanted to ask you. I've seen people gamble already on these top three picks. These boards are not set. The combine hasn't happened. There's no medicals. There's no real team meetings yet. So I don't understand how you're gambling on these top three picks. So gut feeling, I think it is going to be top three quarterbacks. The question is who's going to go 2 versus 3? And I think that's what the Commanders are going to come down to. Do they want Daniels? Do they want Drake May? I don't think they're going to end up trading up with the Bears because it's going to be a premium, and that team needs a lot of help. So, yes, I do think it's going to be top three. No, I would not bet on it. I just want to sit and wait, and that's my opinion. And that doesn't even include these other teams in the top 16 in our notes who do need a quarterback. So, anything you want to add to the top three, or do you want to jump into this top 16 with the Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy talk I've heard?
Yeah, well, we can jump into that. Little thoughts on this is 44, draft number 44 that I'll be writing about. And you were certainly right about New England. It was like throw a dartboard. Who knows what they're going to do? And that was a problem. They didn't even know what they were going to do. Just terrible at how they assess wide receivers. Basically, the only position they got right over all these years has been offensive line because they didn't value defensive speed. And if your cornerback doesn't have speed, he's a safety. He's not a cornerback anymore. But they tried these people who were fundamentally sound, smart people in college, tested well, but didn't run fast enough. And the NFL is about speed. So New England, I don't know. I try to get in the heads of GMs and what they're going to do. And with so many coaching and GM changes, I have to assess who's going to call the shots in each front office. And it gets tougher and tougher. Last year was a weird year, for example, because the top 10 people in the top 10 drafting, I think 7 or 8 had new war rooms, new draft rooms in terms of making the decision. So how do you gamble on that when you don't even know what they're thinking, because it's a whole new wave of thinking? And now you're right, as we transition to the teams that are in the 6, 8, 11, 16 range, what does Atlanta do? We know they need a quarterback. We know New England needs a quarterback, but do they wait? Do they go for a veteran? What about Minnesota? What are they going to do with Cousins? If they keep him, that's not an issue. What about Denver? So what are your thoughts in terms of as we go through pick 16? I think 16, is that number. I don't know who has that 16th pick.
Seahawks. I had Seahawks in these notes. They're
Seahawks, yeah. Yeah, and I have a feeling, just to get the ball rolling, that Seattle rolls with a user-friendly contract with Geno Smith one more year. If they draft a quarterback, it's day 2. What are your thoughts on any of these other quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, Nix, Mike Penix, and what these teams, where's the match?
Denver was the one I could make the argument they could trade up, but pick 5 is Chargers, and we know these teams are so apprehensive about trading within division. I think it's nonsense. If somebody offers you the best package in your division, I don't get why you don't take it. Because if they move up and whiff, that's 5 years of pretty much 1 to 2 wins a year, 5 years of not having a QB in your own division. If they hit it, cool. But if they're moving up, they're giving up other assets. And now all of a sudden they're going to be in a hole and you're not going to be in a hole necessarily. Seahawks was another one. because of the McDonald-Michigan connection. If there was a team who's going to be looking up and down on McCarthy and maybe could sit him a year, go the Geno Smith friendly contract route because he probably is going to go on that friendly contract. Sit McCarthy for a year and let him develop. Giants was another one where I'm like, if there's a quarterback there, Brian Dabble sitting there throwing a temper tantrum on the sidelines, I'm like, goodness gracious, man. What are you doing? He had that weird Cowboys game when they were down like 35-0 at half, and they got like into like a fight, like a physical, not physical, but a verbal confrontation on the sideline on TV. I'm just like, goodness gracious, what are you doing, man? Daniel Jones isn't the answer, so they could go a quarterback. Atlanta, they need pass rushers. I'm kind of surprised we're about 25 minutes in now and you haven't mentioned that yet. They need the NFC South in general has no real strong outlook. If the strongest quarterback in your division is Baker Mayfield for the next 3 or 4 years, it's not in a very hard division to win. They've drafted offensive weapons who they don't use, and that's why I think they had so many issues. So all these teams I could very well see trading up at pick 5 because that's the Giants. Giants would be the first team you'd kind of have to jump because I think they're going to have the discussion. If there's a quarterback there, would they consider it? They still have offensive line holes, probably some wide receiver holes, secondary pass rushers. They just need a lot of help in general still. So pick 4 is the Cardinals. I don't think they're going to trade down unless you send the farm to them. And at that point, I would. They need a lot of help too. So every single of those teams that we've mentioned so far, I can make the argument need a quarterback. The question is, will they pay that price? Seattle does not have that second round pick, but I don't know the compensatory rights right now. I think they're going to get a pick for that if Williams does walk away. So a lot of teams I can make the argument for. I'm just in wait and see mode because my guess is we have two-ish months to figure this out. So it's going to be, what do they truly want to do? You mentioned new war rooms. Who's running the show? Do these guys really want to commit to these quarterbacks? If you do like a Bo Nix, I do think you could sit there and wait. And if you are Seattle, you could go get a Penix in day 2 because my apologies, not Seattle because they don't have that round 2 pick. They need to trade, but he is a Washington local kid. So if you like McCarthy or Nix at pick 16, then I think they would go do it. But a lot of these teams are going to be giving up assets. They can't afford to give up assets because they're drafting kind of high to start with. In no man's land, you mentioned it. You can't build around a team like that. So I think all these teams are alive for a quarterback. I think none of them are alive at the same time. It's going to come down to what's going to take the trade up or what's it going to take for one of these guys to fall. But it happens every year. You've been doing this for 40 some odd years, Ron. How many guys have you seen fall that were not guaranteed to fall? Last year, for example, Will Levis locked pick 4. Well, he went round 2. Last year, round 1, pick 1, it was CJ Stroud, no questions asked. And you saw that happen. So I think these teams in the top 6 are going to be asking around, what does it take to trade up? Just kind of a feeler. And it's silly season, so they might put that rumor out. So I think all these guys and none of these guys are alive to trade up.
Yeah, the toughest thing is they need medicals at the combine. They need medicals for Michael Penix. They need medicals for Bo Nix because they don't want lingering injuries to happen. It's rough in the NFL, even though they're outlawing certain kinds of hits. You still get hit a lot by, the cream of the crop in college that are now in the NFL, and one hit can really knock you out. I mean, there's a chance somebody trades up for Penix or Nix right now. If I had the crystal ball out, because of medicals, they may drop a little bit. And that's why J.J. McCarthy is getting a lot of buzz. There's not really any medical issue that I know of right now. There's a national championship ring on his finger somewhere. And I'll talk more about this as we go through, because this will be the first time I say this publicly. I will do more tape on J.J. McCarthy, but just the same things that bothered me about guys like Paxton Lynch and other guys who were first rounders who should never have been first rounders, the Tim Tebows, the way back to the Tommy Maddoxes. There's just something that stands out that says, no, I can't have this guy. And for J.J. McCarthy, it was the Penn State game. Michigan played Penn State, and by choice, his coach, a well-respected coach who's now with the Chargers, said, J.J. McCarthy, for the last 32 minutes of the game, I don't think you need to throw a pass. And against Penn State, he did not throw. He threw 8 passes in the entire game, and he had no attempts in the second half of the Penn State Michigan game. And that to me is a red flag when you're going out against a very good Penn State team and you're not trying to win the game via the pass. You're just trying to survive based on defense and the run. How much trust do you have in that quarterback? And that's why I'm going to go back to the tape and watch J.J. McCarthy a little bit. But that's my red flag.
I'm glad you brought that up. Some of those old names. What about EJ Manuel? That's another guy who went high. I think he went like mid-round with the Bills and total bust. So if you're a desperate team, you better be asking yourself, is it really worth these guys? Because if you whiff, you're probably getting fired soon.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys can grow. Geno Smith, an example of, well, he stuck with it. He wasn't ready to play early in his career. It showed. He matured. A lot of these people can, there's two schools of thought. You bring in a quarterback and you start him right away, get his feet wet. The Troy Aikman method. You just get bombed the first year, but you're going to grow from it. And these other people, they never recover from it. So it's not that one method is better than another. I'm going to leave you with one more thought before we get off the quarterback thought, and that's Vegas at 13 is intriguing to me. Do they roll with O'Connell, who he's a very accurate quarterback. You're in that area, Purdue, Indiana, and you saw him play, I'm sure. I like what he brings to the table, other than the fact that he's kind of a statue back there. He's that old school. You're not going to get any running out of him in a running kind of environment these days, in the read option and stuff. But he was relatively impressive as a rookie. What does Vegas do? First thoughts at 13.
Well, if Al Davis running the show, just find the fastest dude and just yeah. That's my first. That's the one thing I miss about all this is just find the fastest dude.
Yeah.
Does Vegas keep Devontae Adams? That's one I do not know yet. He was not happy last year. And if the Jets offer you, they don't have their second round pick. What if the Jets offer you this year's third or next year's second? Would he be gone? They need wide receiver help. They were a weird team to me because I kept saying they stink, especially on the defense, but I was wrong so many times in the year. So I think O'Connell is good enough for now. He's not going to really win you games, but I don't think he's really going to be losing you many either. So if you do want to address some of those holes, you could with them. You're in that week. They need a lot, man. I have so many thoughts. I think you could commit to him for next year, but you don't have a quarterback. So if you don't like any of these guys, just go ahead and pass and keep O'Connell. But they got a lot of issues to me. They need another pass rusher, address Devontae Adams. They did draft the tight end Michael Mayer, who they did start using toward the end of the year.
Right.
I believe Josh Jacobs is a free agent, or going to be. He's older guy, so Pierce is an upgrade over McDaniels because they hated McDaniels. And you could see it. He's gone. I think that's the biggest upgrade this season. So they're probably a 7 or 8 win team with O'Connell. So a lot of answers I can argue for. So I think they're going to stay at 13 for now, unless they're J.J. McCarthy. Maybe he does blow them away. Maybe Bo Nix blows them away. So like you said, medical is going to be a big one. And they're going to sit and wait and really do their homework. I'm waiting for those rumors that they want to trade up because they like a quarterback. So if they don't trade up, I wouldn't be surprised either. So they could go trade down too. I don't know who runs that draft this year. They brought in the Telesco. I think it's Tom Telesco now, correct?
Right. Tom Telesco. And they brought in, I think, somebody from the Ravens organization as GM. What do they have here? Let me see my notes here. No, I mean, yeah, they have Telesco, and, he's basically going to run the show. 11 years with the Chargers or whatever he was with. Hopefully he gets a phone in his office this year, because 6 of the last 8 years, no draft day trades. And the average number of teams that make at least one trade in the draft, 29. And he hasn't made a trade in 6 of the last 8 years. I mean, people don't even call him anymore. So I'm curious whether or not they changed their stripes.
Will he be allowed to? That sounds like a GM issue. So if the owner tells him, look, man, just go get us some players, do what you need to do, then I think you might trade down. But 6 of the last 8, no one calls him, and he doesn't even try to. So that might just be in a GM. He doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Although now when you say it all out loud, could he be the GM, like the Dave Gettleman of the world, where he thinks he's smarter than you?
Yeah.
And I think it's where a lot of GMs get in trouble. They think they're smarter and better than you at drafting, and they just do dumb stuff each year. And I think there's a reason why they struggle. So he could be one of those GMs. I think he's gonna have to start trading down
Yeah.
here, or he's gonna
Yeah.
stay put. So if he
Yeah.
trades up, you're probably gonna be as shocked as I am if he doesn't, since he
Yeah.
never trades.
Yeah, that's true. Draft strategy is one of the fascinating things in my life, like picking jurors, or something like that. There's just something about it, the strategy involved in it. So if we're looking a little bit at the draft, 2 months away, a little more than 2 months away from the draft, are there some teams that you're looking forward to, just are really intriguing to you? And it could be free agency too. What are some of the teams that you're fascinated by, what they're thinking, what you're thinking for them?
I just split this answer into 2 different parts. What's your cap space look like? If you're in cap hell, I don't care. You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
So that's one answer, and the other answer is how much draft capital do you have? And assuming you have your quarterback for both. If you don't have your quarterback, it's kind of hard to take a guess. It's just a guessing game. So in my notes, I had to look this up. The Dolphins, the Ravens, the Bills, the Saints, the Chargers, Broncos, and Cowboys. A lot of those guys are Super Bowl contenders or contenders in their own conference. So those guys all are in cap hell, and they're going to need a lot of help. They are massively over the cap. Bills, Fins, and Saints in particular, they're 50 million, and the Saints are 81 million over the cap. I didn't think that was a real number. They're just so on cap hell. They hate their quarterback. It didn't take long. So they're the team who would always trade up to each year under Sean Payton. So that team, I'm intrigued what they're going to do because I want to see how they're going to get around this 81 million without just gutting the roster. If you're not in cap hell, the Bears, the Texans, the Colts, and Bengals, they all have 60 million this year. They all have key free agents. They all have key guys on franchise tags or going to be. The T. Higgins, Jalen Johnson's out there, Michael Pittman. Tyler Boyd is probably going to go this year, or at least he's going to go test the market. That's the last thing I heard. Those are teams who can go spend money. They have a quarterback that they're going to draft or like right now. So if you want that route, they have picks. They can trade down. They need not as much help, or they can go fill those holes. For example, if you need a pass rusher, I believe Brian Burns is going to be out there this year, assuming he doesn't get a franchise tag. So those are the teams who I could think take that next leap forward because they have the money, they have the resources. The divisions themselves are kind of weak except for the AFC North, but even then, the Ravens are going to be taking a step back. Does Pittsburgh have their quarterback? What do the Browns do at their quarterback situation? So those are the 4 teams that immediately came to mind that I think could compete in their own division or at least conference and make it to the playoffs. So that's the ones that immediately stood out to me. You have the other end where these teams are kind of in guess mode right now. So the one I want to hear you on is Dolphins in particular because they have some guys coming down the pipeline. Are they going to pay Tua? I don't know anymore, honestly. So that was the one that intrigued me. Who I don't know what they're going to do. They may need help too in the draft.
Yeah, it's interesting because these teams are going to scramble. You mentioned these paper numbers, $81 million over under the cap or whatever. It's like these accountants, they're just as important as the coaches sometimes when it comes before free agency. So they can't even sign any free agents unless they get to a certain cap number. Excuse me. So I'll talk about 3 teams. Miami, they had 4 draft picks in 2022 because they traded for Tyreek Hill and gave up a bunch and traded for one other player. Last year, they had 4 draft picks. That's 8 in 2 years, where some of these teams had 13 in a year. And they were, I think it was tampering last year that cost them their first round pick. And that was really costly. I mean, to give up a middle of the round pick because your owner wanted to get involved with Tom Brady or whatever the situation was. So now they're going to have more of a complement of picks. They're going to have a first round pick. They've actually missed on most of their picks. I like the running back they got last year, just tailor made for them. But I'm curious as to what they're going to do this year, because when you look at it, they were just a victim of a lot of bad things happening at the end of the year. If you look at the record in a vacuum, you'd say it was a great year. Tua was healthy all year. Tua and Lamar Jackson, two of the quarterbacks you thought were the most fragile, ended up being the least fragile in 2023, which is it can be random and stuff like that. But they had four starters go down to injury, three of them key starters the last 2 weeks of the year defensively alone. Tyreek Hill got banged up at the end of the year. There were a lot of reasons why they limped into the Buffalo game, where you win, you have the second seed, and a home game you lose, you're going right back on the road in a terrible situation in 0-degree weather in Kansas City. So victim of circumstance, but they're not that far away with a fairly good lineup. They're going to have a new defensive coordinator by choice this year. So it's going to be interesting to see, for me, what they do with their draft picks. I'm really intrigued by, hopefully they'll keep them and they'll use them. The other team that I would talk about, the other two, are the Jets. I didn't think I would get involved much in the Jets this offseason, but I'm kind of intrigued by them because I'm starting to do a deep dive on what each team did right and each team did wrong during 2023. And when you look at it again, this is one really, really good defense that the Jets have. If they could have Aaron Rodgers for more than 4 plays, they could do a lot of things offensively. Now, obviously, they're going to have to fix their offensive line, because one of the reasons we only saw Rodgers for 4 plays is because he was sacked or pressured on 3 of the 4 plays. Can you imagine 75% of your entire season was spent on your back because your offensive line was garbage? I mean, a collection of free agency moves and the draft moves have to be made by the Jets. And then they have to get a tight end. I've harped on that a little bit on Twitter. And one of the points that I would make at the end of our conversation is that San Francisco and Kansas City never had to worry about tight ends. Most of the playoff teams never have to worry about tight ends. If the Jets are serious about making the playoffs, they need to find themselves a tight end. So I'm curious as to what the Jets do offensively in free agency in the draft. And then finally, Seattle. There was no better pairing chemistry-wise than John Schneider and the teacher of all teachers, Pete Carroll, who made players in the 5th round, 2nd round talent, and players in the 3rd round all pros. I mean, he was a really big teacher of the game. But Seattle has moved on from him. They've got a good offensive core in terms of people that could really run the show there now. What are they going to do after 2 really, really good drafts? I'm just intrigued by how John Snyder runs the show now. I just don't know which way they're going to go, but they're sitting on a promising young roster.
I like that Seattle analysis. They also have McDonald. I'm never a big fan of jumping in on coaches being good, because you just go down this year after year. How many good OCs, DCs have you seen in your life that are total busts as head coaches? So I think they brought in McDonald to beat those guys down in San Francisco. I think that's the real reason why. They're going to have to address the quarterback, but their core, they have 2 tackles. They have a wide receiver, 2 wide receivers. I know Lockett's getting older, and that's why they brought in Jason. They have some running backs. They have an okay defense. I just think they underachieved the last few years. And I think that's why Pete Carroll is actually not coaching, because they spent premium picks. That defense was so this year. It's just like, how are you guys so mediocre at best? So I think that's a team. I mentioned it. I think they could trade up. They could trade down. Snyder will be running that show. They don't have that 2nd round pick, though. So I think all those teams are intriguing. We'll see what happens. They're going to play some cap gymnastics with the Dolphins in particular. So they all need help. They all need a quarterback possibly. So lots of different directions in all those.
Probably touched upon this already. Teams and tendencies. We've talked about the Chargers, maybe a little bit. Well, we talked about Telesco moving from the Chargers to the Raiders. Now the Chargers have a new GM. Maybe they pick up the phone. I'm curious whether they break that tendency. Are they going to be draft traders? Will the draft not just come to them like they're used to, but are they going to do something different? So I'm intrigued by what's going to happen in the LA Charger draft day draft room. Green Bay is a weird situation. I don't know if people realize this, but when Green Bay drafts early, they draft early at one specific position. 2 of the last 4 or 5 years, they've gone cornerback, 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 cornerback. 2 of the last 4 years, they've drafted a total of 6 wide receivers. So when they concentrate on a position, they really concentrate on it. And I think that's both good and bad because they've ignored a lot of other areas. They haven't fixed their run defense to my satisfaction. When injuries have happened to left tackle, they haven't formally addressed having a capable replacement there. They saw what happened at running back, the lack of speed of running back. When Aaron Jones went down, they were kind of at a loss. Corey Dillon ran under 3 yards per carry, which is completely unacceptable in the NFL. They doubled down on tight end last year, another position they doubled down. So I'm curious about them. And you touched upon it. We went 25 minutes without mentioning Atlanta drafting a pass rusher. And we could say, oh, you could look at the stats. Wow, Atlanta had 40 sacks. What are you worried about? Well, last year sacks were at an all-time high. The average was 44, so they were still below average. Before that, they had something like 22 sacks a year over a 4-year period. And remember, based on the AFC, NFC South divisions and who they got to play, they played 8 quarterbacks in their first or second year. So naturally, against the Sam Howells, against the Bryce Young twice, and so on and so forth, they were going to get sacks that they wouldn't have gotten in any other year. And now the schedule ramps up. Those are my tendencies I want to see broken. Anything on your end?
Chargers. That's the one that really stood out. Who's running that show? They brought in a Ravens guy for their new GM. Unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Is it Harbaugh or is it him? I think it's going to be Harbaugh ultimately because they gave him all that money and they brought him in for a reason. And I think he took that job because he's going to have some say in at least development. And we know Harbaugh will wear out his welcome probably after three and a half years. So if they trade down, they still need a lot of help themselves. So if somebody calls, I would take that call at least and see what they give up because they need offensive line. They lost their center, Corey Linsley. I think that's his name, to that heart issue. Right. They need probably another right tackle. They need wide receivers because we're 48-ish minutes in and no Quentin Johnson talk yet. I don't even know if he can play in the NFL. So that was when you were all over last year when it should have been Zay Flowers at that pick because they need middle of the field help and somebody who has speed, not just tall. They need pass rusher help. Is Bosa going to play more than full games in a year? I don't know. Khalil Mack is getting older. They need secondary help. They need more wide receivers because Quentin Johnson and the other two, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, they can play more than 5 games a year anymore. So they're a funny team. They brought in all these new guys and then Greg Roman as OC. I'm like, you're going to kill your own team. Why would you bring in Greg Roman? What is he truly going to do in that offense that you can't do with anybody else? So there are a lot of ways they could go with that one, but that's the one I want to see. I want to see them trade down and really start to develop this roster because the division – Broncos don't have a quarterback long term. The Raiders don't have a quarterback. Kansas City has their issues, and you saw it this year. They just had Pat Mahomes. They overcame it, but long term, I don't know if it's sustainable. So that's the one I want to see break the mold. That's the one I want to see go out there and have a really good draft.
No, I like that a lot. I mean, the Chargers are sitting on just a fascinating offseason. They love that Baltimore-Michigan connection, where he can deal with his brother and he can deal with what happened there. And that's where all these guys are coming from in the front office and in the coaching staff. So it's really interesting. One move I know that they're going to make is pretty much a running back. I don't think they're married to Austin Eckler. He had a kind of a down year. He wasn't maybe 100%. He's not Jim Harbaugh's type of running back, in my opinion. I think you're going to see a new approach in the backfield from them. And as we shift over and talk about some of the coaches, I'm fascinated by some of the other hires. You mentioned Seattle, what's going to happen in Tennessee. There's a lot of things going on. You have any early expectations for these new coaches? You did mention that just because they're good coordinators doesn't make them an automatic shoo-in as a coach.
I want to see these guys actually run a team first. So until further notice, I think they're all very mediocre to bad until you prove me wrong. I want to be proven wrong first. But the one that caught my mind is Atlanta. What are they gonna do? They brought in a retread. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like what can this coach do? They gave up Bill Belichick. Mike Vrabel was out there. That was two guys I was kind of surprised that didn't get picked up. I think the real winner was Ben Johnson not leaving, because I was so ready to come on this offseason and be like, look, Lions are done. They made the most out of Jared Goff. Ben Johnson isn't there, so he's back. I think that's a big addition. Some of the other guys that did not get fired was Matt Eberflus. He was fired after like week 10. He cleared the offensive side of the ball, but he's back. And then McDermott did the same thing. So I'm like, you guys, did you really fix this team? Were you the scapegoats? That's what I took it as. Both these coaches probably should be gone, or at least in the hot seat going into next year, especially with Vrabel and Belichick out there. So not a lot with those coordinators. I just want to be proven wrong first. Coordinating and coaching are two totally different things. And that's why I think you see so many struggles. So maybe not. They're good. So I don't know. I think a lot of these guys are going to be fired after 3 or 4 years of looking for a new job, especially the Carolina guy. I can't believe he took that job. I'm not going to lie. You're going to go to the Carolina Panthers as your first job? No first round picks. You're meddling owner, throwing a temper tantrum, throwing water on people. Good luck, man. I mean, I get they have issues and they might have some talent on the defensive side of the ball, but yikes, as your owner who is constantly in your own business.
Yeah. Carolina's a Lion 9, that's for sure. I'm of the opinion that Mike Vrabel needed a change of scenery. I think they've gone as far as they could go with that philosophy. I think he could be an asset somewhere else, but I don't mind that he's sitting out a year and maybe revamping what he wants to do and taking a step back for just a minute or two there. Tennessee's fascinating because I think with their defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, I value that even more than the head coach hire, because he's already said he's changing the approach of the defense, which I greatly welcome. One of the key stats for me is how well do you defend the pass? If you allow 2 out of every 3 passes to be completed, you're on the field too long and you're automatically a candidate for losing a late lead. You're come from behind loss kind of thing deal. So I like the approach of getting in your face defensively. Now they have to draft better, and they certainly haven't drafted well at all, primarily because they've taken so many people with police blotter reports, unmotivated offensive tackles, people that they didn't realize, had hidden injuries and stuff like that. So Tennessee's scouting department has to give the head coach at least a chance. 2 other non-coaching issues I'd like to bring up. I kind of love the Ryan Grubb hire as offensive coordinator. He was with the Washington Huskies, did a lot of innovative things. I think it was with Fresno before that, then Washington. Then he has a cup of coffee, somewhere else, Alabama of all places, before he gets to go back to the Pacific Northwest. I think that's a really good jumpstart for the Seattle offense, and we'll see what a defensive-minded coach can then concentrate on defensively. And then we're looking at the Philly situation. I talked about this on the podcast last year. When was the right time to break away from Philadelphia, thinking that this is what they are in 2023? Let's forget about what they accomplished in 2022. And here we go again with Philadelphia. New offensive defensive coordinator last year, new offensive defensive coordinator this year by choice. And they're named people. We have Fangio and we have Kellen Moore as offensive and defensive coordinators. So, I'm curious for you. You got these big names. We're undergoing massive change again. What you did, whether you were at the New York Giants or Philadelphia, you were coach of the year one year, and now you're on the hot seat the next year. It's what have you, you can't get away with anything nowadays. What have you done lately? You have any thoughts about what's going on in Philadelphia?
It starts with the GM. It's Howie Roseman. He's not going to sit there, be like, hey, guys, we have these issues. He's not going to sit there and take it. He's going to be wheeling and dealing. He's actually a fun GM to watch. They need secondary help. I think Fangio runs a complex system so they could start slow, but then pick it up. I think they needed new coordinators. They were kind of battle around on the offensive defensive side of the ball. But when you're 10-1, a lot of people are probably going to come looking too hard. But the people I listened to, they said they had issues. They just kept winning games, so it wasn't that big of a deal. So they could get away with it. But you saw down the stretch, I think he lost 5 of the last 6. Started at 10-1 and finished 11-6, something like that. But is Shane Steichen going to be a CEO type of coach? Because he's talked about it this last season or this off season so far. He wasn't very involved on the defensive side of the ball, and he felt like he was doing a poor job. Is he going to let these guys actually coach? Is the new OC and DC going to be able to gel together? Is Kellen Moore going to throw the ball 50 times a game like he wanted to in LAC at least? Is Jalen Hurts going to be the guy to do that? He took a step back this year, and I was concerned coming into the year for him because everyone fell in love with him. I'm like, hold up now. I want to see a second year with this dude. He took a big step back. So if you're Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, you guys are going to have to figure out how you want to do this. Do you want Kellen Moore throwing the ball all the time? Because that means your defense is probably going to be out there longer. And we know Fangio isn't going to tolerate that. So that's an interesting dynamic. I think it could work. It also could go sideways. They're very Jekyll and Hyde to me, and it's going to take some time for them to figure it out. So they have a lot of moving parts. If they do get it going, the division isn't very good to me. Commanders, Giants, Cowboys are always going to cowboy to me, and they have some issues too. So if you're looking for that one team who I think could get back to at least a Super Bowl contender in the NFC, it'd probably be the Eagles because they have the coaching staff and probably some players to add in. So they're going to be one of two ways. They're not going to be really in the middle. They're too good. Or you could see some major infighting. And that doesn't include the A.J. Brown stuff. That dude's a head case. And you heard when he's playing well, you don't hear much. But when it goes sideways, you immediately hear about him all the time. So can they get him to buy back in? I don't know yet. I need to wait and see. So they're going to be an interesting team this offseason. My guess is you're going to hear more rumors about last offseason too, where they weren't happy with each other. I thought it was weird. They're talking about, hey, we believe in our coach. It's like week 15. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, why do you need to tell me this? I'm concerned you don't buy into him. Like, why? I don't need to hear this. How about you go win? So lots of directions. They're going to be really good or really bad to me. So if Steichen gets fired by week 8, wouldn't be surprised. If they're looking awesome by week 8, wouldn't be surprised. So I think it could work, not work, wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, it's interesting, the rumors that are going on and the infighting. But when teams winning, it kind of gets pushed aside. When they're not, all the wide receiver divas in the league start acting up. So it gets crazy that way. Before I rant on Jacksonville, and make all the Jacksonville apologists and all the fans of Jacksonville mad, are there any GMs that you want to talk about for any particular reason? Something that you like to see better of, or you think are underappreciated? Any GM talk on your end?
I'm going to go with Howie Roseman again. And it ties into our 61 quarterbacks. I had 60 in my notes. You need a backup quarterback. You need a backup quarterback to run your system. You need an offensive line to protect. If you're a GM anymore, you better be looking hard at offensive linemen year in and year out because these guys can't practice. They don't get time to gel. They don't really take preseason seriously. So by week 1, week 2, you're not really a unit yet. You're not very coherent. You're kind of just out there. It takes a little bit of time. That's why I want to see GMs really be addressing each year. So if you're trying to get to that next level, offensive line and backup quarterbacks, that's the two I'm going to harbor on anymore. It's the two where I think the lack of practice time has really hurt the NFL is those two positions. With the 53-man roster, and I've always thought the NFL should go to 60-man roster because these guys aren't practicing anymore. So until you go to a bigger roster, you're going to really have to year in and year out make sure you have some depth at these two positions because you've seen teams just get killed because they have a weak offensive line or their quarterback gets hurt, and now all of a sudden you have a backup who's probably not even NFL starter caliber. So that's kind of the macro. Micro, it's very team oriented. You mentioned bulky. I'm gonna let you rant about that because if you're Trevor Lawrence and co, man, he's definitely hurting you.
Yeah. So basically, I like Trevor Lawrence, and I think Jacksonville's a good team. What I think is that they missed the boat. They had a chance to be not just trying to be a Buffalo and a Kansas City and anybody else, Baltimore, for example, where you're automatically Buffalo, Kansas City. What do you think about these teams? They're always at the top. They're always the team to beat. We haven't always thought about Jacksonville as the team to beat, but they certainly could have been. Backstory on Balky is he was the GM in San Francisco for a number of years, and he ruined that team. He basically took 3 or 4 players each year that I rated in my draft. I give them either a numerical rating, I give them a star rating, which means they're NFL draft worthy, but only after numerical rated players have been chosen, or I give them NR, kind of not rated, not worthy of being an NFL pick. And he always had a lot of those picks. He also took a lot of injury risks. I mean, a lot of injury risks in San Francisco, guys that mostly never panned out, unfortunately. The exception to the rule, I don't know if he drafted him because may have been before his time, but Frank Gore's always been the exception. He was so beat up in college at Virginia Tech, and look at the career he had, an eventual Hall of Fame career. Hats off to Frank Gore. But then he goes to Jacksonville, and the 2022 draft, because of COVID year eligibility, because of a lot of factors, was the deepest draft that I've ever covered, not in terms of first round talent, but in terms of overall talent. I usually rate about 230 players as draft worthy. And that's not enough for 250 slots, but 250 players, about 160 rated players and 230 overall. I had 290 in the 2022 draft. That's how deep it was because of all these 5th and 6th year guys chomping at the bit to come out with a lot of talent. What does Baki do? He turned 12 picks into 7. He actually traded back and only drafted 7 players. He takes a controversial pick, that's kind of worked out, a guy who wasn't really ready, number 1, a Walker in terms of their pass rushing guy. He had a so-so rookie year. He wasn't ready. And then he had, I think, 10 sacks last year. So he's a very good player. He may end up being worthy of number 1. But after that, to squander all these picks. And I think that was the difference between them being in the Super Bowl and not being in the Super Bowl, because they had a real chance to win against Kansas City in the playoffs that year. So what does he do next year when the talent is not as good again? We're back down to 230 eligible, actually down to 220 eligible players on my board. He ends up with 13 draft choices last year, 2023 draft. And he drafts, for me, a world record 7 players who did not make draft-worthy grades on my board. That means now a lot of teams didn't even draft 7 players. He took 7 players who I didn't think should be in the NFL. So what happened this past year? 5 of his 13 picks did not play a snap. 9 of his 13 picks did not start. And remember, this is not a deep roster. I mean, they have a lot of good players, but they're not deep at every position. They're not deep at tight end. They're certainly not deep on the offensive line where they had suspensions and injuries. There were a lot of areas that they could have used starters from the draft. They had 8 starts outside of their number 1 pick. 12 players had 8 starts. It was an absolute waste of draft capital. So I'm sorry, Jacksonville. I thought you could have been an elite team, but you're satisfied with a roster that can clearly be 9-8, 10-7 every year, and then be beaten by Buffalo, by being beaten by Kansas City, and being beaten by Baltimore. That's my rant.
Happy for you, man. As soon as you brought this question topic up, I'm like, I gotta let him rant about Balky, because the Jaguars construction. So coming into this year, you had Stroud, Texans. You didn't know at the time. Anthony Richardson, we still don't know. Titans are whatever. So that's your division sucks. The division was weak coming into the year. It's still kind of weak, but I think CJ Stroud has proven it. Although I'm a bit hesitant to jump in because we've seen quarterbacks play well and then fall off a cliff. So I just got to see it again. But this was a division next 3 or 4 years. 10-7, mid floor, 11-6, 12-5. Very winnable. But man, bust. Guys who can't play. They brought that tight end last year. They signed up. They had the free agent who I'm drawing a blank on, Evan Ingram.
Yeah, he was good. I apologize. I should have mentioned him.
Evan Ingram, that was a good signing. But then they drafted a tight end in the 2nd round. I'm like, didn't you just pay your tight end? What are you doing? They had the suspension. You had Antoine Harrison, the Oklahoma. He was Oklahoma, right? Last year, the offensive tackle.
I believe so.
I believe so. He was okay, but he had issues coming out. And I knew that was going to take some time. But those Urban Meyer picks, yeah, those did not pan out well. Calvin Ridley was another one, and that was weird all year. They just could not get him going. They gave up, I think, a second for him. A late second is what they give, maybe an early third. But he hasn't panned out yet. He had that one really good game week 1 against the Colts and kind of fell off after that and was very up and down. So you have that. You need offensive line. You need corners. You probably need a pass rusher, depending on what they do with Josh Allen, the linebacker, not the quarterback. So they're the team. If you're like, man, we had a lot going for us and they squandered it all, it's them. Balky should have been going after the Urban Meyer debacle. And I can't believe he didn't get actually fired, because I know the owner wanted Meyer, but didn't the GM have to sign on in this too? So it didn't make sense to me. They kept the GM and brought in a new coach, but Jacksonville is the team. You're like, man, what a waste. And now Lawrence is going to be getting paid 2 years down the road. Josh Allen's going to be getting paid soon. I think Calvin Ridley's big money. You spent that money on the wide receiver from Arizona, who I'm drawing a blank on. They paid big money for him for a number 2 wide receiver. They paid Evan Ingram. They need offensive line help. That's where I think really hurt Lawrence last year. He just didn't have much help. ETN's been okay. He had that year where he got hurt. He's been okay, but he takes a beating too. So they have a lot of questions they need to answer. Doug Peterson, I think, is on the hot seat too. Didn't he fire his defensive staff?
I'm going to double check that. I don't think so.
Maybe it was somebody else. I thought they gutted their coaching staff. And it sounded like Peterson's getting very upset. So I think he's kind of feeling the heat because they underachieved this year. They started very well and then fell off a cliff. I know Lawrence got hurt, but there was some
soft schedule too.
Yeah, that schedule was a joke this year. 9-8. They didn't even make the playoffs. I'm like, how?
They didn't make playoffs, no. And for those people who are saying, well, wait a second, you're being too hard on them. They had a great 2022. Remember, they broke the free agency spending record. They spent $240 million for these people. All the reason why they were good in 2022 had nothing to do with the draft and team building. And you're right. You make a great point about the cap space that's going to be gone when they have to re-sign, those top 2 players, Josh Allen and Lawrence. They could have been developing rookies from the 2022 and 2023 draft. Instead, they're going to be cutting these people. This was all about hitting it in free agency. It had nothing to do with Baki and the draft. Maybe I should give him credit for signing these free agents, and I should, but his talent evaluation in college is going to cost this team.
I think you need both ends. Like, it's fine if you hit in the free agency market, but when you pay all that money and then you just whiff in the draft, Kansas City is the exact opposite. They gave up Tyreek Hill, didn't spend that money, and then they hit those picks out of the park. Niners spent a bunch of money in picks, but they hit those guys. So you need kind of the yin and the yang here. But Balky is just, you dominated a weak division that year because you spent a bunch of money. But, man, when you bring in all that money, that bill comes eventually due. And it's the NFL. You can't mess around with the cap. So I think you should rip into them. When you knew you spent all that money, you should be drafting very well, at least guys who are replacement level, to replace these key guys because you can't pay them. So I think he deserves it. He's earned it. You've had plenty of opportunities. It's just you can squander so much and be like, cool for agency, but it's just can't spend that money and then suck at the draft at the same time. So.
Yeah, it takes both. I mean, some people avoid the draft, some people embellish the draft, but whatever you do, you have to hit it. Teams that will shape the draft. I think we touched upon this. Anything you want to add? I know you were mentioned the Bears at number 1, very intriguing. Cardinals, Texans. Anything you want to add to what might shape the draft coming up? And we have a lot. This is going to change tomorrow probably. As we haven't even had free agency, we'll have some pre-draft change. But anything you're looking for to add in this area?
Free agency. You need to do free agency first because obviously the first thing that technically starts in 3-ish weeks. I think it's 3 weeks you're officially a free agent. Bears have money. They're a team with the number 9 pick. They do not have a second-round pick because I think it was Montez Sweat. I think that's who they added from the Commanders. It was the defensive lineman. So they have money. There are some key guys they can go and get. Maybe T. Higgins does walk. He doesn't get a franchise tag. You can go get him. You can get a Brian Burns. You should pay Jalen Johnson because that dude has earned it. He's been kind of beat up, but he went out and earned it at least. So you have plenty of money you're going to pay him. You're probably going to have a rookie contract on your quarterback. The number 9 pick, it's the Washington kid, Rome. I don't know how to say his name. It's the Washington kid.
Yeah, he's very good.
Very good. Do you really want to spend a wide receiver on pick 9 when you probably need another pass rusher? You probably need another cornerback, and this is a deep wide receiver class. I've even heard arguments Marvin Harrison Jr. is even the best wide receiver, which sounds insane, but I kind of believe it. So Bears at number 9, I would be looking hard to trade down because if you do go get a Caleb Williams, he runs around a lot, and I don't think he's going to make it in the NFL at that rate. But let's say they get a Drake May for some odd reason. They could go offensive line help. I don't think you should be spending on wide receiver on pick 9 when you are getting Caleb Williams probably at 1. I just think there's a lot better ways to spend that pick 9 instead of using it on a wide receiver in this deeper wide receiver class. Now, this assumes they can trade down. If you can't trade down, maybe go get somebody else at wide receiver, but there's some nice offensive linemen in this draft too. So that's the team I want to see them at least explore the option of not a wide receiver, a team that could go get a big free agent or two because they have the money, or maybe a team that just trades down ultimately. That's the one I think. They are funny because the division long-term, kind of weak to me. Vikings don't have a long-term QB possibly. Detroit is probably going to have to pay Jared Goff. They're going to have to pay some other guys who they did nail in the draft, but they have some key guys coming down. Ben Johnson's probably going to be gone. Packers have Jordan Love. They have some holes. So if you really want to win that division, this is the draft you have to do it on because the rest of your division outlook is either okay to kind of bad. So Bears are going to be the answer until I figure out what to do with pick 9.
Yeah, it's just so intriguing as we're getting into it, for the first time. There's so many draft storylines and how to draft, how I would draft. You mentioned wide receiver. Do you really want a wide receiver at 9? It really depends on your own GM's draft board. If you see I never want to be the first to take somebody where there's so many close together. Like this is a good offensive line draft. If there are 5 or 6 offensive linemen that are rated about the same, I wouldn't want to be the first to take an offensive lineman. I want to be 4th or 5th or 6th, make sure I get one. But if I don't see any difference, I'm not rushing to the window to get that. And that might be the case with a very deep wide receiver draft with at least 3 top 10 prospects at wide receiver and probably 6 or 7 worthy of first round grades this year. Other positions, for me, it's where there's a gap. For example, you have Brock Bowers at tight end. Who's the second best tight end? I think Mitchell is the second best. And then there's a real big gap right now for third. If you really need a tight end, and I'm emphasizing tight ends, you have to get one of the top 2. There's such a gap between number 2 and 3. But in wide receiver or an offensive line, there may not be a gap coming until the 8th wide receiver or the 10th offensive line. So as a GM, that's how I would approach the draft. New England at 3, New York Giants at 6. I'm really fascinated by what they do. I think the Giants, with 3 of the first 47 picks, they're going to make a trade. They made 2 last year. They're going to shape the draft, in my opinion. And what New England does at 3, they're going to shape the draft, in my opinion.
I like those answers. Those were other 2 obvious ones, but the number 9 one was the one I put the most thought into because it was just long term. It's going to determine what you guys do. I'm happy you brought up the wide receivers, offensive tackles, offensive linemen, and then the tight end drop off. If you're these teams, you cannot be sitting there looking at a wide receiver when you're pick 9 when you have 5, 6, 7 dudes. Doesn't include some of those other wide receivers who are probably day 2 or day 3 guys who probably contribute in the NFL right away because it's just how the NFL works anymore. You can go find good wide receivers later on. So do you really want a wide receiver at pick 9, or do you want an offensive lineman, or do you trade down? The tight end one was also fascinating because Kyle Pitts, I don't think he's very good. I mean, unless Atlanta starts using him all of a sudden, but do we see the tight end, the Georgia Powers kid? Do we see teams let him go because these rookie tight ends just don't contribute anymore unless your name's Sam Laporta, but I think they just lucked out. Noah Fant going to be a free agent. TJ Hawkinson was a stud coming out, can't miss, and he got traded. He's already on his second team, not even 5 years in. So
Yeah.
that's the one I'm always having issues on, and he's going to be all over the place. I do not think Chargers take him at 5, not at tight end. They have other issues, but maybe in the teens somebody takes him. But Dalton Kincaid last year really wasn't used until Dawson Knox got hurt. And then Kincaid started playing well. Knox comes back, and it feels like they just quit using Kincaid, and Bills need wide receiver help. So tight end's the one I'm always going to be hesitant anymore because we see these guys who are absolutely awesome and then just disappear in the NFL. Travis Kelce was a later guy, I believe. Kittle was 5th round, 4th round, 5th,
Yeah,
6th.
and these you don't have to draft them in the first round, but some of these guys were underutilized in college, not Bowers, but Kittle was underutilized in college, and Kelce had a highlight reel for sports bettors, but that's about all in terms of what we recognize his name at his university. So, and it's the same with wide receiver. Just look at last year where we had Puka Nacua in the 5th round, and we had Tank Dell in the 3rd round, and some others. That's exactly what you said in terms of you can find wide receivers. So it's where the cluster is and how you position your draft to hit as many people as you can that could be eventual starters.
Bingo, man.
Final thoughts. And what's next? I mean, for me, I'm still doing my autopsy of what went right and what went wrong last year for each team. I'm about 85% complete with that. I haven't got to the combine. I haven't studied tape yet on some of these receivers and cornerbacks and stuff like that. I don't believe in doing it during the year. I believe in enjoying the college football and NFL year and doing my study afterwards. There's plenty of time to do that. Nobody's going to draft. I will make a final comment about the draft, but first I want to hear what some of your final thoughts are, what you're looking at, where you go from here.
Well, we touched on free agency, looking at teams who can go spend money, kind of wait and see mode right now with the draft because combine hasn't happened yet. I've already seen names about guys who are probably going to go high. For example, the Toledo cornerback, that's the guy I think is going to go higher. He's supposed to be a real speedster. Oregon center, I think he was a center. He had a great Senior Bowl. If you need interior offensive linemen, Jacksonville, Seattle, LA Rams, the Niners, some of those other teams who haven't really drafted very well. I want to see what they're going to start doing with some of these other guys, not the big names, just because if you're not drafting high, it's going to be hard to get a big name. So that came to mind. I want to see the schedule. We know who they're going to play.
Yeah.
We just don't know when yet. That's the one I really dive into. Figure out these international games, although I think the NFL has largely fixed those in the sense where you know how to travel. You know what to do to go to there, come back. Do you want to buy? Do you not want to buy? I want to see these teams who had a hurt quarterback, how much of it was real in the sense if your quarterback was playing well, like was that something that was sustainable coming into this year, or was it just one of those, man, they got some easy opponents during that stretch before they got hurt, particularly Cincinnati, because it's going to come down to what your opinion on Burrow is. They're a team who have money, like I've mentioned. They need defensive help. They might be losing wide receivers. So right now, it's just about sitting what you do with free agency, sitting what I think you do with the combine, the draft, and now I'll start to build out some regular season win numbers. Just kind of like gut feels, just kind of seeing what the market's going to do. Looking for teams who don't have much upside. For example, I think the Titans might be a team. Could that regular season win total be to 5.5, 6? If that's the case, man, I need you to get to 7 with that roster. So this is the year where I just look at you up and down, just kind of sit and relax and kind of start building my own numbers, seeing what sticks from last year, what does not. So wait and see mode is the short answer. Long answer is going to be just kind of looking at what you can and cannot do and just kind of have a gut feeling what I think the rest of the roster is going to do. Now, some of them are going to be kind of easier, like I mentioned, like the Bengals. You need to handicap Baltimore, who I know is going to be losing guys. They've lost their DC and other stuff. So we know that Kansas City has their issues, and we know the Chargers got better, but I can't do much with those two until I can get a gut feeling of what Oakland, or my apologies, Las Vegas and Denver do. So that's my answer. I'm just going to be sitting, probably reading your stuff because you go up and down. I'm like, if Ron writes it, I want to read it or at least see what he says and see if you and I do match up sometimes. So wait and see mode, have some gut feeling regular season win totals because those keep coming out earlier and earlier. I think last year those came out, I want to say May, like early May is when they came out. Maybe I misremember. Maybe it was late May, but I think it's getting earlier and earlier because with these domestic books, it's about race to be first anymore instead of getting good, accurate information. I know Caesars and DraftKings put out numbers real early, and I had like an Arizona under 5.5 mid-May.
Yeah.
So
that was the one to pounce on. There was no upside for Arizona at all because we knew Murray was going to miss at least 6 games. We knew they had a new staff. We knew they had roster holes. So we knew 2 guys wanted out, and one of them did get out via trade right at draft time. There was no reason to wait if you didn't like Arizona.
That was the easiest regular season. I was stunned they gave me 5.5. I think it was like minus 125. I'm like, you need to get to 6. I'm like, man, that should be at least minus 200 minimum. Then they dropped down to 5 and then eventually landed 4.5. So if you took
some
the under,
3.5s out there at the end.
Oh, it was like 3. I think over was like plus money, like a significant amount. So, but yeah, that's my recommendation. I'm just, yeah, it was ridiculous. Just find teams who have such little upside because what's going to happen is we saw it with the Rams last year. They were from 7.5 to 6.5. Bucks were 6.5. Cardinals are another 5.5 one. Those teams were all people just saying there's almost no upside. Now, 2 of them are wrong, obviously, but if you had under 7.5, you had a good number, but 6.5 was not a good, even though you still lost. Bucks I whiffed on last year. So I'm looking for teams who have no upside right now.
Yeah, agree with you on all of that. 2 things that I would point out is that it's fascinating which teams have that 4th place schedule this year. I mean, you got the Chargers with a 4th place schedule, an upgrade at the coaching staff, a lot of decisions that I think are going to go right for them. But at the same time, you've got a number of teams that they're going to deal with that have the 4th place schedule. Isn't the maybe not New England, but anybody in the AFC North with a 4th place schedule, they're all kind of interchangeable because they have, the Bengals. I mean, a healthy Joe Burrow automatically moves them up. And they weren't really that bad last year, and they do a lot of good roster building. And then you have Houston as the 1st place schedule, which means their 3 uncommon opponents are going to be much tougher than what Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and Tennessee plays. So you've got a lot of dynamics there. Normally, I would say the NFL draft, if you do well in the NFL draft or if you do poorly in the NFL draft, you would have a low correlation to season win totals. But I don't know if it's a trend now, but surprisingly, there's been a high correlation of late with how I've rated the NFL draft and how well they've done against season win totals the next year. 2022, my top 5 were the Giants, the Jets, Baltimore, Seattle, Kansas City, also Detroit up there. All of them bettered their win totals from 2022 season win totals. My bottom feeder was Las Vegas. I had almost never seen a worse draft. And under new coach Josh McDaniels, they were terrible. They also had the fact that they weren't as good as 2021 anyway. Last year, the Rams really killed the draft, and they did well. I didn't think that they killed the draft, so I was wrong on that. But certainly their draft success played into how well they did. So kudos to them for drafting well, even though I didn't see it. My top teams were Pittsburgh, Seattle, and obviously Houston did well in the draft, but I didn't see that necessarily either with CJ Stroud. But the 4 teams that I rated as D plus drafts or worse were Buffalo, Denver, Carolina, and Jacksonville. And we saw what happened with Carolina and Jacksonville. They just bottomed out completely. So there's been more of a medium correlation with the draft than a low correlation. And that's something I'm going to look into as I assign my draft grades.
I think you nailed it. When I look at these teams, it takes about 18 to 24 months for a lot of these teams to develop their guys. People do draft grades. I don't get the point, man. There's no way you can look at me and be like, hey, they had a good draft. Like, there's no way you're going to know that answer unless you had a Colts level draft with Darius Leonard and Quentin Nelson. You had 2 all pros, by the way, but that's such an outlier. You can't tell. Now, I've whiffed a couple too. With the Rams one, I'm glad you brought up. I'm like, there's no way this team's going to win. And they nailed the draft last year with no first. I don't think they had a second last year either. So that was another team I was impressed with because they had nobodies and they were supposed to bottom out this year. A lot of people had them projected as one of the worst teams because Stafford was unhealthy most of the time. You have Sean McVay talking about retirement. It's just like, man, I whiffed. I'll take my L there. That was when I whiffed on. So
me too. I mean, I underestimated the value of a healthy Matt Stafford still being a top 10 quarterback.
I whiffed. I was like, there's no way he's going to play all the amount of games. He played a lot of those games, but Buffalo, I mentioned the free agency cap spending. They're in cap hell too. And they spend premium positions on pass rushers and they're losing guys. They don't have a pass rush still. Von Miller contract? Ugh, dude. They need wide receiver help. Stephon Diggs, another diva wide receiver you can talk about. So I think you nailed those draft grades in the correlation where if you can get one or two good drafts in that time period, and if you have the quarterback, you can have a really good season or at least compete in the playoffs or so. So that's what I've noticed too. So I'm happy you brought those grades up because that's about what I had too, was they had some pretty good or bad drafts and teams you had. So we're still waiting on a couple others. Like Kansas City last year was one I didn't have an opinion on because I need to wait. So another team that I thought you nailed it.
It's it's a puzzle. You're putting all these pieces together. Did they overachieve versus the stats versus underachieve? What's their schedule looks like? What's their quarterback position? How they do in free agency? What are they missing after the draft? Pieces that they didn't compete in. Where is the placement of all the games? And when you put it all together, the middle of the draft grades, it could go any way. I mean, there's just no way to tell, like you said, in the first year, what's going on. But at the very top and the very bottom of all these categories, you start to put in the missing pieces. And not to be remiss, that let's include special teams just to close this out. Because if you're consistently poor like Green Bay, it's going to cost you a game or two, which it did. And unfortunately, it cost them a game or two at the worst possible time. So you're factoring all these different things. Dan, an hour and a half goes by really quickly with this, and this is our first go around, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Where are you found normally in terms of not just Twitter, but any other podcast or people you're affiliated with?
Oh, I'm not affiliated with anybody anymore. I haven't done a podcast in 18-ish months. I just didn't want to do them anymore. I got burned out one year. I'm like, I don't want to talk. But when you asked me, let's do some team building, I immediately agreed to it because like I've mentioned, I love reading your stuff. You take a very holistic approach, no BS. Of course, you're going to whiff, man. It's just a lot of things you can't know. You don't have a problem taking your L's. When you're right, you're right. You're wrong, you're wrong. You move on. But I'm on Twitter. I'm in many gambling discords or Slacks, whatever you call it anymore. So if you've seen me here on Twitter, you're probably in a group with me. I'm at 4 for 4. I'm in Bet the Prop still. I'm at Stealing Lines. I'm in my own little group. And that's the ones that I'm public. I'm in Las Vegas, Chris's Discord, even though I'm not active in there very often, but I am in that Discord. I'm in For Yellow Kings, but it's college basketball season, so I've been much more active in there. So I know all over the place, but this is the podcast I've been waiting years to do on. I just love, you said it, man, it's a puzzle. Sometimes you're going to be right. Sometimes you're going to be wrong. You need this, you need that. Maybe you need more or less of this. So, and to all the listeners out there, how many topics did we cover in this giant game of what if? So I love doing these. These are fun for me. I love taking this approach. So I'm everywhere, nowhere. If you want to tweet me, cool. If not, it doesn't bother me at all.
The bottom line in all this is I cannot emphasize enough. It's not about just making picks. It's going through the process and having a reason and writing it down, plus or minus what it is, tweaking and so on. And it's all about brainstorming. And that's what this session is about. That's what I did all season long with Chris. That's what I hope to continue to do in the off season from time to time, whether it be college or NFL. Not go so gung ho that I get burnt out before it becomes September. But things like this brainstorming is so incredibly valuable, and I hope it's valuable for everybody who's watched us or listened to us as well. So Dan, thanks so much for doing this, and I'm sure we're going to connect down the road, and we'll be back at some point or another talking NFL. Thanks, everybody.